Jalen Prince. On September 6, 2024, Joppatown High School in Maryland became the scene of a tragedy that would expose a pattern of concerning behavior that had been escalating for years. Jalen Rashawn Prince, 16 years old, brought a loaded weapon to school and targeted a classmate in a bathroom. The incident would reveal a documented history of threatening behavior, physical confrontations with peers, and verbal outbursts toward teachers that had continued even while he was in detention at the Charles H. Hickey School. What warning signs had been present? And why hadn't interventions prevented this outcome? Prince shot 15-year-old Warren Grant in the school bathroom during school hours, an act prosecutors described as intentional and premeditated. There was no indication that Grant had posed any threat to Prince or provoked the encounter. The incident appeared to stem from a dispute involving a relationship, though the exact circumstances remained unclear during investigation. Prince was apprehended shortly after the incident, with school officials and law enforcement responding quickly to secure the scene. Born around 2008 or 2009, Prince had accumulated concerning documentation amid in his school records over the years. His history included making threatening statements toward teachers, engaging in physical confrontations with other students, and displaying patterns of aggressive communication that raised red flags among school staff. Even after being placed in detention at the Charles H. Hickey School, these behaviors persisted, requiring staff interventions, including physical restraints on multiple occasions. A psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Witchak assessed Prince as presenting an extremely high risk for future harmful behavior. The evaluation suggested untreated patterns of aggression that had not been adequately addressed through previous interventions. However, no clear motive beyond the characterization as senseless was established. The circumstances didn't fit typical profiles of thrill-seeking or trauma response, leaving questions about what specifically drove Prince to bring a weapon to school that day. Warren Grant's family provided victim impact statements describing him as selfless, loving, and kind. They spoke about the profound loss they had suffered and their pursuit of justice for their son. The community struggled to comprehend how a dispute between teenagers had escalated to such a permanent and devastating outcome. Grant had been simply attending school when his life was ended by someone he knew. Prince's trial took place in May 2025, where a jury convicted him of first-degree responsibility for Grant's passing along with related charges. The prosecution presented evidence of his intent to use the weapon and the deliberate nature of his actions. Throughout the proceedings, no expressions of remorse were noted from Prince, a detail that would factor into his sentencing considerations. On October 14, 2025, Judge Kevin Mahoney imposed a sentence of life plus 20 years, suspending all but 80 years, with 5 years of probation to follow. Due to the classification of this as a serious offense, Prince would be eligible for parole consideration after serving half of the 80-year term. Judge Mahoney called the tragedy profound, emphasizing that Grant had posed no threat and that Prince had brought a weapon with clear intent to use it. State's Attorney Allison M. Healy stated that no sentence could bring Warren back, but emphasized the importance of accountability and deterrence. The case highlighted ongoing debates about how educational institutions and the justice system should handle teenagers who display escalating patterns of concerning behavior before they commit irreversible acts. As of 2025, Prince has likely been transferred to a Maryland adult prison facility from the Juvenile Detention Center, where he had been held during trial. His earliest possible parole date would be decades away, and his documented pattern of institutional behavior suggests ongoing management challenges for correctional staff. From a school hallway, the next case would take us to a wooded area in Florida. Aiden Fucci. On May 9, 2021, Jacksonville, Florida became the focus of a massive search after 13-year-old cheerleader Tristan Bailey failed to return home. The community mobilized to look for her, not knowing that one of her classmates had already taken her life in nearby woods. Aiden Sean Fucci, 14 years old, had lured Tristan away during the early morning hours, and what happened next would shock investigators with its brutality and apparent lack of motive beyond the act itself. Why would a teenager commit such an act against a classmate? Born on November 6, 2006, Fucci had been a student at Patriot Oaks Academy with no prior criminal record, though friends later reported his fascination with bladed weapons. He would name these items and carry them frequently, displaying an unhealthy fixation that should have raised concerns. In the weeks before the incident, he had made statements to peers about wanting to harm someone randomly, comments that were later recalled but not reported to authorities at the time. Fucci inflicted 114 wounds on Tristan, with 49 of these being defensive injuries, showing she had fought desperately for her life. The attack took place in woods near the neighborhood, and forensic examination revealed he had written a word on her ankle afterward. The level of brutality suggested significant time was spent in the act, rather than a quick or impulsive attack. The investigation moved quickly once surveillance footage showed Fucci walking alone near the area where Tristan's remains were later found. His clothing showed blood evidence, and DNA testing conclusively linked him to the scene. A tip from the weapon broke off during the attack and remained in Tristan's remains, providing additional forensic evidence. Friends came forward about his previous statements regarding wanting to harm someone, creating a pattern of premeditation. During the investigation, Fucci posted a selfie on social media from the back of a police vehicle during the search for Tristan, appearing to mock the situation. This demonstrated a disturbing lack of understanding about the gravity of what he had done. His mother, Crystal Lane Smith, attempted to help by washing his bloodied clothing, an action that would result in her own prosecution for evidence tampering and a 30-day jail sentence. Once in custody, reports from jail staff indicated Fucci boasted about the act, claiming it made him more authentic because he had acted face-to-face rather than using distance methods. He was involved in multiple physical confrontations with other detainees and staff, requiring interventions, including chemical restraints. Notebooks found in his cell contained drawings depicting harmful scenarios, suggesting ongoing concerning thought patterns. Fucci pleaded guilty on February 6, 2023 to first-degree responsibility, accepting accountability for his actions. During his statement, he offered an apology that many, including Tristan's mother Stacey Bailey, felt was insufficient given his previous behavior. Stacey Bailey stated in court that she believed he was beyond saving, expressing her view that true remorse was absent despite his words. R. Lee Smith sentenced Fucci on March 24, 2023 to life imprisonment with a review possible after 25 years. The judge characterized the act as heinous with no purpose except to harm, noting the premeditated nature and the extended suffering Tristan endured. The sentence reflected both the severity of the act and Fucci's age at the time, balancing punishment with the possibility of eventual review. In January 2025, Fucci was transferred first to a reception and medical center on the 15th, then to Cross City Correctional Institution on the 27th. As of 2025, he remains at Cross City Correctional Institution in Florida, where he is serving his life sentence. While Fucci's case involved extensive planning, the next would be marked by its lack of clear motive. Joy Quest Williams. On August 30th, 2024, Syracuse, New York, experienced a shooting that would devastate multiple families and shock the community. Joy Quest Williams, 15 years old at the time, was involved in an incident at 901 Madison Street that would claim one life and endanger two others. The case would become notable not for extensive details about motive or planning, but for the absence of clear explanation for why these young people were targeted. What drives such acts when no obvious motive emerges? Williams fatally shot 15-year-old Alexia Lynch, known as Lexi, and attempted to harm two other individuals during the same incident. The shooting occurred in a residential area, creating fear throughout the neighborhood as residents tried to comprehend what had happened. Law enforcement responded to reports of shots fired and discovered the scene that would lead to a major investigation. Details about Williams's childhood and background remain limited in public records. Unlike many cases where extensive psychological evaluations and family history are presented, this case proceeded with minimal public disclosure about what factors may have contributed to his actions. The absence of this information left the community with questions about whether warning signs had been missed, or if the incident truly came without prediction. The investigation identified Williams as the perpetrator through standard law enforcement methods, though specific forensic details were not released to the public. He was taken into custody and charged with second-degree responsibility for Lexi Lynch's passing, along with 2 counts of attempted harm for the other individuals who were targeted. The prosecution moved forward with the case as Williams turned 16 while awaiting trial. In February 2025, Williams entered guilty pleas to all charges rather than proceeding to trial. The plea agreement acknowledged his responsibility for the shooting and the attempts to harm others. By accepting the plea, he avoided a trial that would have required victims and family members to testify about the traumatic events of that August day. The court scheduled sentencing for April 2025. Lexi Lynch's mother, Crystal Herndon, spoke about her daughter's dreams of becoming a nurse and her active involvement in church activities. She described Lexi as someone with a bright future who had plans and goals that would never be realized. The family prepared to address the court during sentencing proceedings, hoping to convey the magnitude of their loss and seek justice for their daughter. Judge Ted Limpert imposed a sentence on April 24, 2025 of 14 years to life for the primary charge, plus an additional 2 to 6 years for the attempted harm charges, resulting in a minimum of 16 years before parole eligibility. Judge Limpert noted that the incident had shocked the whole community, a sentiment echoed by prosecutors and community members who attended the hearing. Throughout the proceedings, Williams's motive remained unspecified despite his guilty plea. This lack of explanation left many in the Syracuse community frustrated, unable to understand what had led to such permanent consequences. The absence of a clear narrative made it difficult for residents to identify lessons or warning signs that might prevent similar tragedies. As of 2025, Williams is serving his sentence in a New York State prison facility. He will be eligible for parole consideration after serving the minimum 16 years, though approval is far from guaranteed given the nature of his offenses. Lexi Lynch's family continues to honor her memory while advocating for awareness about youth involvement in harmful situations. From a case with limited details, the next would involve one of America's most notorious school incidents. Nicholas Cruz. On February 14, 2018, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, became the site of one of the deadliest school incidents in American history. Nicholas Jacob Cruz, 19 years old, returned to his former school armed with a rifle and opened fire throughout multiple floors of the building. The attack would claim 17 lives and injure 17 others, forever changing the Parkland community and reigniting national debates about school safety, access to weapons, and mental health treatment for troubled youth. How did the warning signs go unheeded in a case that seems so predictable in retrospect? Born on September 24, 1998, Cruz had experienced a difficult childhood marked by adoption after his birth mother's challenges. His adoptive mother passed away before the incident, leaving him feeling orphaned and alone. From preschool onward, Cruz displayed behavioral issues that teachers and counselors documented extensively. He received diagnoses including attention challenges and oppositional behavior, with evaluations suggesting prenatal exposure to harmful substances had affected his development. Throughout his school years, Cruz's behavior escalated, with multiple reports filed about threatening statements he made regarding harming others or himself. He was eventually removed from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas due to disciplinary issues and was attending an alternative education program at the time of the incident. Despite numerous interventions, including law enforcement contacts and mental health evaluations, no action was taken that would have prevented him from obtaining weapons or accessing the school. On that Valentine's Day afternoon, Cruz arrived at the school carrying a rifle in a bag. He pulled the fire alarm to create confusion and chaos, then began firing at students and staff as they evacuated into the hallways. The attack lasted several minutes, with Cruz moving through multiple floors before discarding his weapon and attempting to leave the scene by blending in with fleeing students. He was apprehended walking on a nearby street shortly after the incident. During his initial interrogation, Cruz confessed to the attack and expressed a desire for officers to end his life. He stated he felt unloved and blamed others for humiliating him, citing these as factors in his decision to commit the attack. Investigators found materials in his possession showing his obsession with previous school incidents and his desire to achieve infamy. Magazines with concerning symbols were recovered from his belongings. Cruz's trial began in July 2022, after he had pleaded guilty in October 2021. The trial focused solely on sentencing, with the prosecution seeking maximum penalties and the defense presenting extensive evidence about brain development issues, mental health conditions, and the effects of prenatal substance exposure. Expert witnesses testify on both sides about Cruz's capacity for understanding his actions and potential for rehabilitation. The jury recommended life imprisonment on October 13, 2022, declining to recommend execution despite the prosecution's request. Judge Elizabeth Scherer sentenced Cruz on November 2, 2022, to 34 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, ensuring he would never be released. Families of those who were killed expressed outrage at the jury's decision not to recommend execution, feeling that justice had not been fully served. As of 2025, Cruz remains in a Florida state prison facility, housed in a location not disclosed to the public for security reasons. His appeals have been exhausted, and his sentence stands as imposed. While Cruz's case involved a planned attack on multiple people, the next would show how a single act during a theft could end a life. Miguel Andrade. On July 18, 2022, Memphis, Tennessee became the scene of a carjacking that would claim the life of a beloved community member. Miguel Andrade, 15 years old with an 8th grade education, was already wearing an ankle monitor from a previous arrest when he targeted Autura Eason Williams, a 52-year-old pastor, in her own driveway. The incident would expose failures in the monitoring system and raise questions about how juveniles with pending charges continue to commit serious offenses while supposedly under supervision. What factors allow teenagers already in the justice system to commit such acts? Andrade approached Eason Williams in her driveway and shot her multiple times during the theft of her Infiniti vehicle. After shooting her, he removed her body from the vehicle and drove away in the stolen car. The attack was swift and brutal, with no indication that Eason Williams had time to defend herself or escape. Witnesses in the neighborhood heard the shots and called emergency services, but she was pronounced deceased at the scene. Limited information exists about Andrade's childhood and family background in public records. What is known is that he had already been arrested previously, resulting in the ankle monitor he was wearing during this incident. The fact that he was able to commit such an act while supposedly being monitored raised serious questions about the effectiveness of juvenile supervision programs and whether resources were adequate to track at-risk youth. The investigation moved quickly to identify Andrade as the perpetrator. Physical evidence from the scene, witness statements, and the recovery of the stolen vehicle all pointed to his involvement. The decision was made to prosecute him as an adult, given the severity of the offense and the fact that he had been under supervision when he committed it. He was indicted and held in custody, awaiting trial. Autura Eason Williams had been actively involved in her community through her church and various outreach programs. Her husband, Darrell Williams, prepared to give a victim impact statement that would express the family's pain and their view of the person who had taken her from them. The community rallied around the family, expressing shock that such an incident could occur in a residential neighborhood during daylight hours. On February 1st, 2024, Andrade entered guilty pleas to second-degree responsibility and carjacking charges. By accepting the plea agreement, he avoided a trial that could have resulted in a longer sentence if convicted of first-degree charges. The plea represented an acknowledgement of his actions while allowing the court to move directly to sentencing. During sentencing, Darrell Williams addressed Andrade directly, stating his hatred for what Andrade had done and expressing that he wished the worst possible outcome for him. Throughout this powerful statement, Andrade reportedly remained expressionless, showing no visible emotional response to the pain he had caused. The judge imposed a sentence of 28 years, consisting of 20 years for the primary charge and an additional 8 years for the carjacking offense. As of 2025, Andrade is serving his sentence in a Tennessee state prison facility. He will be eligible for parole consideration after serving a portion of his sentence, though the serious nature of his offense and his lack of remorse make approval uncertain. From urban Tennessee to rural South Carolina, the next case would involve a school and a troubled family dynamic. Jesse Osborne. On September 28, 2016, Townville, South Carolina, experienced a tragedy that began in a home and ended at an elementary school. Jesse DeWitt Osborne, 14 years old, had been living in a household marked by dysfunction and had developed an unhealthy fixation on previous school incidents. On that September day, he would commit acts that would devastate 2 families and traumatize an entire small-town community that had never experienced such events. What drives a teenager to target both family and innocent strangers? Osborne had experienced mistreatment from an alcoholic father throughout his childhood, creating an environment of fear and instability in the home. He had also been the target of peer harassment at school, leading to social isolation and difficulty forming connections with classmates. These factors combined with his obsession with previous school attacks, particularly the Columbine incident, which he studied extensively and appeared to idolize. The incident began when Osborne shot his father, Jeffrey Osborne, 47 years old, at their home. After this, he drove to Townville Elementary School and crashed his vehicle into the playground fence. He then opened fire on students and staff, specifically targeting those on the playground during recess. A volunteer firefighter who was present tackled Osborne, preventing further casualties and holding him until law enforcement arrived. The attack resulted in fatal injuries to a young student and wounded others, including a teacher who was on playground duty. The small community of Townville was completely unprepared for such an event, with parents racing to the school after hearing reports of an active situation. Emergency responders worked to secure the scene while treating those who had been injured. Osborne was taken into custody at the scene and confessed to his actions during initial questioning. He showed little emotional response initially, though this would change over time. A .40 caliber handgun was recovered at the scene, along with evidence suggesting he had planned the attack. Investigators found materials at his home indicating his research into previous school incidents and his desire to replicate them. Osborne pleaded guilty in 2018 to all charges rather than proceeding to trial. During subsequent proceedings, he stated he wished the events had never happened, suggesting he had gained some understanding of the permanent consequences of his actions. He participated in therapy while in custody, where he appeared to develop more emotional awareness about what he had done. In November 2019, Osborne was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. However, this sentence was later modified in 2023 to 75 years following legal challenges about juvenile sentencing. Families of those who were harmed expressed mixed feelings about his statements of remorse, with some offering forgiveness while still advocating for maximum punishment to ensure public safety. As of 2025, Osborne remains in a South Carolina state prison facility serving his 75-year sentence. From solo acts, the next case would involve a teenager who became part of something much darker. Brogan Rafferty. In November 2011, Ohio became the center of a shocking investigation into a series of cases linked to Craigslist job advertisements. Brogan Rafferty, 16 years old, had become involved with Richard Beasley, a man decades older, who had become a twisted mentor figure in his life. What started as an unusual relationship would descend into a nightmare that would claim multiple lives and leave Rafferty facing the most serious consequences imaginable for someone his age. How does a teenager become entangled in such a web of manipulation and terror? Rafferty had grown up in a challenging environment with a mother struggling with addiction and a father who maintained strict discipline. From an early age, he learned to be self-reliant, navigating a household where stability was rare. His family had connections to biker culture, which shaped some of his early worldview. By his teenage years, Rafferty was isolated and vulnerable, searching for guidance and belonging that he wasn't finding at home. Enter Richard Beasley, who presented himself as a mentor and father figure. Beasley began involving Rafferty in increasingly concerning activities, gradually drawing him into a plan that involved posting fake job advertisements on Craigslist. The scheme targeted men seeking work, luring them to remote locations with promises of employment on farms. Once there, Beasley would take their lives while Rafferty assisted or stood by, too afraid to refuse or escape. The operation resulted in 3 confirmed cases and 1 survivor who managed to escape despite being shot. The survivor's testimony would prove crucial in bringing both Beasley and Rafferty to justice. When authorities finally connected the dots, they discovered graves where victims had been buried with lime to accelerate decomposition, showing the calculated nature of the scheme. The planning and execution suggested this wasn't impulsive, but rather a methodical operation. During the investigation, Rafferty confessed to his involvement, describing Beasley as death personified in his statements to authorities. He explained how he had been both terrified of Beasley and loyal to him, creating a psychological dynamic that experts would later analyze. Mental health professionals who evaluated Rafferty described signs of dissociation and trauma bonding, suggesting he had been manipulated by someone with far more experience and malevolence. Rafferty was tried and convicted, receiving a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The severity reflected the court's view that despite his age and circumstances, his participation in multiple cases warranted the harshest available penalty. Beasley also received life without parole and later passed away while incarcerated. The families of the victims spoke about men who had simply been seeking honest work to support their families, only to encounter evil disguised as opportunity. As of 2025, Rafferty remains at Warren Correctional Institution in Ohio. There have been no significant updates to his case in recent years. Some experts have viewed his case as an example of how young people can be drawn into heinous acts through manipulation, while others see it as demonstrating that age doesn't excuse participation in calculated schemes. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. While manipulation played a role in the previous case, the next would involve a confrontation between peers. Bardia Shojayfard. On November 7th, 2023, Leeds, England witnessed a tragedy outside a school that would spark conversations about youth interactions and weapon carrying. Bardia Shojayfard, 14 years old, encountered Alfie Lewis, 15, near Horsforth School during what should have been an ordinary day. The encounter escalated rapidly, ending with Alfie's life being taken in a manner that shocked the community and law enforcement alike. What circumstances could lead to such a devastating outcome between two teenagers? Shojayfard came from what appeared to be a loving family, with no obvious red flags in his background that would predict such an act. He was a student at the school with no documented history of serious behavioral issues. However, investigators would later discover he had developed an interest in weapons, particularly knives, that he had been exploring through online content and images saved on his phone. This fascination had been growing without adults in his life being aware of the extent of his fixation. The confrontation with Alfie occurred outside the school grounds during a time when students were present. Shojayfard was carrying a 13-centimeter blade that he had brought to the area. When the encounter turned confrontational, he used the weapon, inflicting a fatal injury that punctured Alfie's heart. The attack was swift, and despite emergency response, Alfie could not be saved. Witnesses described the chaos and horror as students realized what had happened. The investigation revealed that Shojayfard had images of knives stored on his phone, suggesting his interest wasn't spontaneous but had been developing over time. Authorities examined whether this was a premeditated act or a confrontation that spiraled out of control. Shojayfard's statements to police indicated a mixture of fear and anger about the encounter, though his decision to carry a weapon suggested some level of preparation for potential conflict. During interviews, Shojayfard admitted to the act but claimed it had been self-defense, arguing he had felt threatened during the confrontation. However, forensic evidence and witness testimony painted a different picture, suggesting the level of force used exceeded what could reasonably be considered defensive. The prosecution argued that bringing a knife to the area demonstrated intent to use it if a situation arose. The trial took place in 2024, where the court heard from witnesses, examined forensic evidence, and considered expert testimony about youth development and decision-making. Alfie's family spoke about their son's bright personality and the devastating impact of losing him so suddenly. They described a boy who had his whole life ahead of him, taken by a split-second decision by someone carrying a weapon they should never have had. Shojayfard was convicted and sentenced to life detention with a minimum term of 13 years before he could be considered for release. As of 2025, there have been discussions about potential sentence reviews due to his age at the time of the offense. He remains in youth detention in the UK, where he receives ongoing education and intervention. From peer conflict, the next case would involve betrayal in a school setting. Mohammed Umar Khan. On February 3, 2025, Sisset, England experienced a tragedy in the courtyard of a school that left a community reeling. Mohammed Umar Khan, 15 years old, attacked Harvey Wilgoose, also 15, during what witnesses described as a sudden eruption of tension. The attack occurred during school hours, with other students present, turning a place of learning into a crime scene that would haunt everyone involved. What drives someone to commit such an act against a peer they knew? Khan had been experiencing difficulties at school, including being the target of harassment from other students. He had felt humiliated and isolated, struggling to find his place in the social environment. These experiences had built up over time, creating resentment and anger that he didn't know how to process constructively. While many teenagers face similar challenges, Khan's response would take a tragic and irreversible turn. Investigators discovered that Khan had a concerning habit of posing with knives, suggesting he had developed a fixation with weapons as symbols of power or protection. This behavior had gone unnoticed by adults who might have intervened if they had been aware. On that February day, he brought a 13-centimeter blade to school, a decision that would prove fatal. The attack occurred in the school courtyard where multiple students were present. Khan approached Harvey and used the weapon, inflicting injuries that would prove fatal despite immediate emergency response. CCTV footage captured parts of the incident, providing crucial evidence about what transpired. The presence of cameras meant there was little dispute about the physical facts of what happened, though Khan's state of mind and motivations remained key questions. In statements to authorities, Khan described feeling like he wasn't right in his head leading up to the incident. He spoke about feeling like he had snapped after enduring what he perceived as ongoing mistreatment. Mental health professionals who evaluated him explored whether he had been experiencing a crisis that impaired his judgment, though ultimately this didn't negate his responsibility for his actions. Harvey's family and friends spoke about a young person with potential and kindness who had been taken far too soon. They described the shock of losing him in such a manner, at a place where he should have been safe. The school community was traumatized, with students and staff struggling to process how such an act could occur in their midst. The trial and sentencing took place in October 2025, where Khan was convicted and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 16 years before parole eligibility. The court heard about his background, his struggles, and the decisions that led to that fatal day. The judge emphasized that while circumstances might explain, they could not excuse the taking of a life. During the investigation, authorities examined Khan's search history, which showed he had been looking at content related to weapons in the period before the incident. This suggested some level of preoccupation that might have been addressed if adults had been aware. The case sparked discussions about how schools and families can better identify warning signs in young people who might be struggling. As of late 2025, Khan is held in youth detention in the UK, where he participates in educational programs and receives interventions aimed at rehabilitation. While Khan's case involved peer dynamics, the next would shock a community with its scale and planning. Ethan Crumbley. On November 30th, 2021, Oxford High School in Michigan became the site of a shooting that would claim 4 lives and forever change a community. Ethan Robert Crumbley, 15 years old, brought a weapon to school and opened fire on his classmates and teachers, creating chaos and terror that lasted until he was subdued. The tragedy would not only result in his prosecution, but also the unprecedented charging of his parents for their role in making the act possible. How did the warning signs go unaddressed until it was too late? Crumbley had been born on April 28, 2006, and experienced significant struggles throughout his childhood. His parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, would later be convicted of involuntary manslaughter for their role in failing to intervene despite clear warning signs. Ethan had been largely left to himself, with his parents often absent or inattentive to his deteriorating mental state. He spent long hours alone, developing increasingly dark thoughts that he expressed through drawings and online content. In the months before the incident, Crumbley had created concerning content, including drawings depicting acts of harm and references to his mental struggles. He had expressed thoughts about depression and hearing voices, but his parents had not sought meaningful intervention. The day before the attack, his parents had even purchased the weapon he would use, despite knowing about his concerning state of mind. On the morning of November 30th, teachers discovered disturbing drawings Crumbly had made during class. His parents were called to the school for a meeting, where administrators showed them the concerning content and recommended immediate mental health evaluation. However, his parents resisted taking him home or seeking help that day, and he returned to class. Hours later, he retrieved the weapon from his backpack and began his attack. 4 students lost their lives: Madison Baldwin, Tate Meyer, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling. 7 others were wounded, some critically. Crumbly used a Sig Sauer handgun his father had purchased just days earlier, firing more than 30 rounds as students and teachers scrambled for safety. He was stopped by law enforcement and taken into custody without resistance. The investigation uncovered videos Crumbly had made discussing his plans and his reasoning, providing chilling insight into his mindset. He had been planning the attack and preparing himself mentally for carrying it out. Investigators also discovered he had a history of concerning behavior toward animals, another warning sign that had gone unaddressed. Crumbly pleaded guilty in October 2022 to all charges including 4 counts of first-degree intentional harm and multiple counts of terrorism causing death. His guilty plea meant he acknowledged full responsibility for his actions. During sentencing proceedings, he offered an apology to the victims and their families, expressing remorse for the pain he had caused. In December 2023, Crumbly was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, making him one of the youngest people in Michigan to receive such a sentence. The judge considered his age, but determined the nature and planning of his acts warranted the maximum penalty. His parents were separately tried and convicted in 2024, marking the first time parents of a school shooter faced criminal charges for their role. An appeal was filed, but denied in May 2025, with courts finding the sentence appropriate given the circumstances. As of 2025, Crumbly is held at Oaks Correctional Facility in Michigan, where he will spend the rest of his life. From a school setting, the next case would involve a classroom and a betrayal of the teacher-student relationship. Philip Chisholm. On October 22, 2013, Danvers High School in Massachusetts experienced an unthinkable betrayal of trust between teacher and student. Philip Chisholm, 14 years old, had been a student in Colleen Ritzer's math class. The 24-year-old teacher was beloved by students and colleagues, known for her dedication and kindness. What happened after class that day would shock not just the school but the entire nation, as details emerged of how Chisholm had violated every expectation of student behavior. What could possibly motivate such an act against someone who was there to help him? Chisholm had moved to Massachusetts from Tennessee and was adjusting to his new school and environment. He had been involved in soccer and appeared to be adapting to his new life. However, beneath the surface, Chisholm was struggling with thoughts and impulses that he kept hidden from those around him. His family and teachers saw a quiet student, not recognizing the darkness he was grappling with internally. On that October afternoon, Chisholm remained after class while other students left. What followed was an attack on his teacher that involved multiple forms of harm, showing a level of depravity shocking for someone so young. He used a box cutter taken from the classroom, and the attack was sustained and brutal. Afterward, he took steps to conceal what he had done, moving her remains to a wooded area behind the school. Blood evidence and forensic analysis painted a clear picture of what had transpired. Chisholm's clothing contained biological evidence, and his movements were tracked through security footage. When questioned by police, he initially denied involvement, but eventually acknowledged what he had done. His statements to investigators were chilling in their matter-of-fact tone, suggesting a disconnect from the gravity of his actions. During trial proceedings, the defense attempted to argue that Chisholm had experienced a mental health crisis that had impaired his ability to control himself. They claimed he had been triggered by something in the classroom, though this explanation was met with skepticism. Mental health experts evaluated him extensively, with differing opinions about his state of mind at the time of the attack. Chisholm was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years for the primary offense, along with additional concurrent sentences for related charges. The sentence meant he wouldn't be eligible for parole until he was in his 50s, ensuring decades of incarceration. Colleen Ritzer's family spoke about the devastating loss of a daughter, sister, and teacher who had so much life left to live. The case took an additional troubling turn when, while in juvenile detention awaiting trial, Chisholm attacked a female staff member. This second attack resulted in additional charges and sentencing, demonstrating that his dangerous behavior hadn't been an isolated incident, but rather part of a pattern. The attack on the staff member raised serious questions about his capacity for rehabilitation. In 2024, Chisholm received an additional sentence for the assault on the detention facility worker to run concurrently with his existing sentence. As of 2025, he is incarcerated in a Massachusetts state prison where he is held separately from the general population due to his age and the nature of his offenses. The final case would take us across the Atlantic to an island community forever changed. Aaron Campbell. On July 2, 2018, the Isle of Bute in Scotland experienced a tragedy that would shatter the community's sense of safety. Aaron Thomas Campbell, 16 years old, committed acts against Alicia MacPhail that were so heinous they defied comprehension. The case would become one of Scotland's most notorious, not just for the nature of the offenses, but for Campbell's disturbing behavior afterward and his apparent lack of genuine remorse. How does someone so young commit such calculated acts and show no empathy for the suffering caused? Campbell had been born on May 7, 2002, and moved to the Isle of Bute at a young age. The small island community knew him as a popular teenager, though beneath this exterior, he was struggling with serious issues. He had experienced mistreatment from his mother and had developed concerning patterns of behavior that went largely unnoticed. By his teenage years, Campbell had begun drinking heavily and engaging in increasingly risky behavior. Campbell had been tested for ADHD and showed signs of depression, engaging in self-harm at times. Mental health professionals would later examine whether these struggles contributed to his actions, though ultimately they determined he understood right from wrong and was capable of controlling his behavior. He had also developed disturbing thoughts that he kept hidden from those around him. On that July night, Campbell took Alicia from her bed while she was staying at her grandparents' home. He carried her to a wooded area where he committed multiple acts of harm against her before ending her life. The attack was sustained and showed a level of depravity that shocked even experienced investigators. Afterward, he returned home and went about his day as if nothing had happened, even participating in search efforts for Alicia. DNA evidence and CCTV footage provided the crucial links to Campbell. His movements on the night in question were tracked through security cameras, and biological evidence placed him at the scene. During police interviews, Campbell initially denied involvement, but as evidence mounted, his story changed multiple times. Eventually, the physical evidence left no doubt about his responsibility. What made Campbell's case particularly disturbing was his behavior after arrest. During trial proceedings, he showed little emotion about what he had done. In statements that shocked the courtroom, he described feeling satisfied by his actions, suggesting he had derived some twisted pleasure from the suffering he inflicted. This lack of remorse was noted by the judge and played a significant role in his sentencing. Investigators also discovered Campbell had searched for information about DNA evidence after the attack, showing he understood the consequences and was trying to avoid detection. He had also expressed disturbing thoughts to a friend that suggested he had been fantasizing about such acts before carrying them out. These revelations painted a picture of someone who had been planning and preparing rather than acting on impulse. Campbell was convicted and sentenced to life detention with a minimum of 24 years, one of the longest minimum terms ever given to someone his age in Scotland. The sentence reflected both the severity of his acts and his complete lack of remorse. Alicia's family spoke about the light she had brought to their lives and the unimaginable pain of losing her in such a horrific manner. Recent reports from 2024 described Campbell bulking up in the prison gym, suggesting he was focusing on physical development while serving his sentence. As of 2025, he remains at HM Young Offenders Institution Polmont in Scotland, where he will stay until he reaches adulthood, after which he will be transferred to an adult facility. He won't be eligible for parole consideration until 2042, when he will be 40 years old. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.